Good morning, America. I'm Ilani and this is Tiffany, and we will bring up an urgent look at the growing global pollution crisis. Now imagine waking up in a city where the smog filters darkens the sky, rivers catches fire from toxic waste, and industrial runoff threatens public health and wildlife. Well, this was the reality for many Americans in the mid-20th century.
The United States faced a growing crisis, air and water pollution, as industrial production and economic development rapidly increased. Air and water pollution statistics from factories and industries also rose. The consequences were also no longer invisible. Countless people suffered from serious health risks like respiratory illness, contaminated drinking water, and environmental destruction, and much more. As pollution escalated, so did the concern.
As environmental degradation worsens, people began to take action, known as environmentalists, one of them being Rachel Carson. In 1962, she published Silent Spring, a powerful book that revealed the deadly impact of pesticides like DDT towards the lives of wildlife and even humans. Her work helped spark further recognition towards real issues that needed urgent attention within the modern environmental movement. These issues continued to grow. In 1970, Senator Gaylord Nelson of Wisconsin proposed the idea of millions of Americans taking the streets for the first Earth Day, a nationwide demonstration of demanding action to protect the planet. This was a movement that brought environmental issues to the national stage and showed just how much public support there was for protecting the planet. Promoting what began as a peaceful event towards further public acknowledgement quickly became a political turning point, illustrating that environmental protection was no longer an issue, it was a national priority.
The momentum of social development towards recognition brought lasting changes like the Clean Water Act, the Clean Air Act, and Endangered Species Act, reshaping the government's role in safeguarding natural resources. Through public pressure and scientific regulation emerged as the nation's answer to the environment crisis. What began with smoke-filled skies and polluted rivers evolved into a movement that continues to shape policy and consciousness today.
These actions were developed by the Environmental Protection Agency, or EPA, who were established by President Nixon. This agency became the nation's main environmental watchdog, regulating pollution, enforcing laws, and holding industries accountable. The EPA helped ensure cleaner air and water and gave citizens a way to demand action from their government.
One of the first major actions to prevent further environmental degradation by the EPA was enforcing the Clean Air Act. This law limited fossil fuels emissions from factories and cars in order to fight further implementing regulations like the State Implement Plan, National Ambition Air Quality Standards, National Emission Performance Standards, and more. It overall helped improve air quality in many areas, and not everyone was happy. Some industries argued that regulations hurt businesses and cost jobs due to the less demand from Limitations Act, as well as larger costs due to the decline in demand.
Then came the Clean Water Act in 1972, which aimed to prevent toxic waste from being dumped into rivers and lakes, ensuring that all bodies of water remain clean and safe for activities like swimming, drinking, fishing, etc. The act introduced the National Pollutant Discharge Elimination System to regulate pollutants and set standards to control water contamination. It also provided funding for wastewater treatment plants to address existing pollution and granted the government greater regulatory authority. While these measures made a significant impact, challenges remained, particularly regarding stricter regulations on pollution from urban areas, which continue to worsen the problem. As a result, some of the nation's waters still fail to meet clean water standards. Another major law was the Endangered Species Act in 1973. It protected animals and their habitats on the risk of extinction, as well as preserves their environmental habitats, bringing forth national concern towards biodiversity and habitat destruction. An example of this is the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service. The law saved many species, but it also sparked debates, especially from landowners and developers who saw it as a restriction on land use.
Even as regulations improved, the 1970s also had serious environmental scares. In 1979, the 3 Mile Island nuclear plant in Pennsylvania had a partial meltdown, still the most serious accident in the U.S. commercial nuclear plant history. Although radiation exposure was limited, releasing no detectable health effects on the plants or workers or the public, The accident caused widespread panic across the national land, which raised fears about safety of the nuclear energy. This incident led to the Nuclear Regulation Commission, also known as the NRC, placing stronger safety standards across the country.
The 1970s brought major change, with grassroots activism and federal regulation reshaping how Americans view nature and public health. The government tried to help by creating the Department of Energy, but some Americans felt as if they were being blamed for the U.S. energy issues. This sentiment was reflected in President Jimmy Carter's famous Crisis of Confidence speech, also called as the Molasses speech, where he warned about growing dependence on foreign oil and energy conservation. While the speech received mixed reactions, it heightened awareness of environmental responsibility and needed for energy reform.
In 1980, nature made its own statement when Mount St. Helens erupted in Washington. After over a century of dormancy, the volcano showed signs of activity despite monitoring by scientists and government officials. The exact timing of the eruption remained uncertain. A 5.1 magnitude earthquake triggered the largest landslide in recorded history, leading to a massive lateral blast that killed 57 people. Wildlife habitats were destroyed, and ash spread across multiple states, disrupting daily life. In response, the Federal Emergency Management Agency, also known as the FEMA, coordinated relief efforts, and the government designed the area a national volcanic monument to support ecological recovery. The eruption not only emphasized the importance of environmental monitoring, scientific research, and emergency planning, but also contributed to the FEMA's growing role in managing future disasters.
The 1970s brought major change, with grassroots activism and federal regulation reshaping how Americans view nature and public health. While not every solution was perfect and debates over regulation continued, the impact of this area is clear. Laws like the Clean Air Act, Clean Water Act, and the Endangered Species Act still protect us today, reminding us that people, science, and policy can unite and create a lasting change and protect the planet for future generations. Thank you for tuning in to our podcast.